Alright, so here is where the real programming begins. So far, we've been doing not much more than dragging and dropping, which, although you've hopefully enjoyed seeing how easy it is to create a user interface for your app, is not really at the core of where app development is. So, to see where that is, we're going to jump over to viewcontroller.swift, which we saw a couple of videos ago, and this is where we're going to be spending most of our time in this course, writing Swift code to make our app do something. So I'm going to start by just running through the contents of viewcontroller.swift, and then we'll write just a little bit of Swift to see how easy it is to get our app to do something. So first off, notice how all of this is nicely color-coded. This is something that Xcode and a lot of other integrated development environments or IDEs do for you. And first here then we've got a bunch of green code which has double slashes at the beginning. Now this is how in Swift we add a comment to our code. So anything after a double slash will not be executed when the app is run. It's simply a comment for yourself or other people who are editing the code of the app to tell them something about what the code is doing. So you can see we've got some information about this particular file here, and I can add in a comment very easily just by adding 2 slashes, and then I can type whatever I like. It doesn't have to be valid Swift in any way. So that's how we add comments, and you can see we've got a couple more there in the code for viewcontroller.swift itself. So moving on from comments, here we've got import Uikit. And what we're essentially doing here is bringing in a bunch of code which allows us to work with the UI. So Uikit is one of many frameworks included in Xcode, and we need it to be able to work with things like buttons, text fields, and labels. Pretty much any app will have to do that, so import Uikit is going to be the first line of most of our viewcontroller.swift files. There are various other frameworks, such as Media Player for controlling media, HomeKit for working with the HomeKit features, and a lot more. In fact, you can see some of them by using the prediction feature of Xcode. So if, for example, we type import and then an M, you can see all of the different frameworks or modules that have an M in the name. So ones that we'll be using are Media Player, for example, MapKit, and HomeKit there. It's best not to import any framework that you're not actually going to use though, because that keeps your app fast and small. So those are frameworks. Now our code is creating a class. Now I'm not going to go fully into what a class is at this point. We'll see about that in the next section. Suffice to say that a class is a chunk of code with functions or methods inside it which do something at certain specified times. So here within this class, we've got 2 main methods, that is Viewdidload and didReceiveMemoryWarning. Viewdidload is called when the view itself is loaded, i.e. when the app screen displays. So that's where we're going to put code that we want to run when our app is ready to go. didReceiveMemoryWarning, as you might imagine, is run when a memory warning is received. And the sort of apps that we're going to be running are pretty light on memory, so we're unlikely to need this. But if you are doing active memory management, this is where you would want to remove some unnecessary things from the memory to avoid your app crashing. So these are the 2 methods that are included inside this class. The class is called ViewController because it controls the view. Remember, the view in this context is everything on the iPhone screen. And this colon here denotes a type. So classes can have certain types, which gives them particular attributes. And this particular class has a type of UI view controller, which gives it all the attributes of a view controller. At this point, you don't need to worry about specifically what those attributes are. Just know that we're defining a class, which is a chunk of code called ViewController, which controls the view that we're working with on main storyboard. Next, you'll notice these curly brackets, And curly brackets are used to contain chunks of code. So you notice as I move the cursor left and right for this opening one, then Xcode highlights the matching closing one. So everything between those two curly brackets is included within this particular class. Similarly down here in our two methods, that is mini chunks of code, the code there is contained within curly brackets as well. We'll be using those all over the place. Finally, I'll just explain these words here. We've got override and func and super. And firstly, don't worry too much about these. It's quite advanced Swift that we're dealing with here, and the sort of programming that we're going to be doing is much simpler than this. But just so you know what these commands are doing, essentially this func here says that we're defining a function or a method called Viewdidload, and this override means that the Viewdidload function actually already exists somewhere. It's already included in the code for our app, so we're actually just adding some extra commands to it. Similarly down here, we're defining the function did receive memory warning, but the override keyword says that we know that this method did receive memory warning already exists, we're just adding some extra code to it. Finally, we have super Viewdidload here, which is simply a bit of code that will call the default functions that need to happen when the view is loaded. The super refers to something called a superclass, which we don't need to look at now, but we will examine later in the course. Similarly, this code here calls what needs to happen when a memory warning is received. So to summarize, you don't need to be absolutely clear on what's going on. This is quite complicated Swift code, and you'll be pleased to hear that the Swift code that we're going to write is much, much simpler, but it is good at this point to have just a rough idea of what each of these bits of code are doing. So to recap, we've got a comment up there, which is anything with a double slash in front of it. Then we import the Uikit, which is a framework which allows us to work with user interface elements like buttons and labels. Then we create a class, which is a chunk of code called ViewController, which has a type of UI ViewController, which means it will allow us to control the view, which you'll remember is the main screen with the UI elements on it. Then we have our curly brackets here, which contain the code for the class. And within the class itself, there are two functions or methods, which are just chunks of code themselves. One called Viewdidload and the other called didReceiveMemoryWarning. The Viewdidload method is called when the view loads, i.e. when everything appears on the screen. And the didReceiveMemoryWarning method is called when there's a memory warning. The func keyword here just says we're defining a function or a method, and the override keyword states that we know that the Viewdidload method and the didReceiveMemoryWarning methods are already created. We're just adding some code to them. Finally, the super.viewdidload and super.didReceiveMemoryWarning just do whatever needs to happen when either the view is loaded or there's a memory warning. And we can add the rest of our code in these curly brackets, and then it will be run either when the view is loaded, if we put it there, or when we get a memory warning, if we put it there. All right, so enough setup. It's time to write our first bit of Swift code, which is going to be very simple. What we're going to do is write a piece of code that will display some text in the console down here. Now remember, the console is where we get messages and error messages from our app. So anything that appears there will not appear on our user's screen. So it's a great way to send messages to ourselves and debug our apps. For now, we'll just use it as a very simple example of how to run a Swift command. So make sure you're writing your code inside the Viewdidload method. That is just before that curly bracket there. And all you need to type is print and then a pair of parentheses, and inside the parentheses a pair of double quotes, and then I'm just going to put the text that we're now familiar with, hello world, but you can put anything you like inside there. So the print command just means print something to the console. And then in brackets, we have some information for the print command. In this case, what we want to be written in the console. And we contain that within the double quotes there. So if we now run that, as soon as the view is loaded, i.e. the UI elements appear on the screen, we should see Hello World appearing in the console down here. Just as a reminder, it won't display anywhere on the screen, so this is only a message for us developers who are running things in Xcode. And there we go. There's our Hello World. And that appeared just as the view loaded. So that's our first very, very simple bit of Swift code, which is all very impressive, I think, as far as it goes, but it doesn't actually make our app interactive in any way because we can't interact with what the user is doing. So we're going to step it up a notch in the next video and start running some code when a button is pressed. And that's really when we're starting to build real-life interactive apps.